Hello, everyone. Very happy to be with you here at this plenary session where we plan to talk about dialogue. My name is Katrín Jakobsdóttir, a former politician and Prime Minister of Iceland for 7 years, and now a chair of the Polar Dialogue, which we have been running at this Arctic Circle Assembly. This is Antje Boetius, my co-chair, an amazing scientist and director of the Alfred Wegener Institute. We have here a number of amazing panelists which are going to join us for our last session here at the Arctic Circle Assembly. Pascal Lamy, Vice President of the Paris Peace Forum and Director General of the World Trade Organization from 2005 to 2013. Jefferson Cardia Simões, Professor of Glaciology and Polar Geography, Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil. We have here on the other side, Miyuki Qiajunnguaq Daorana, Youth Delegate from Greenland and a Master Student in Anthropological-Inughuit in the Arctic University of Norway. Henry Burgess, Head of NERC Arctic Office of the UK and President of the International Arctic Science Committee. And last but not least, Pema Gyamtsho, Director General of ICIMOD. And give them all a very warm welcome.
So, what would you think after the speaker just before us? How much dialogue do we need? That is the question of this panel. But we are discussing not any dialogue, we are discussing polar dialogue. And so when we think about where we all meet several times a year because we are polar people, we have ahead of us the International Year of Glacier Preservation. We have the UN Decade for the Cryosphere starting next year for 10 years. IASC and SCA are really busy because they constantly have even member states that would like to come in. And we have a big workload towards the next International Polar Year for good reasons. And still, there is often a feeling, and during our dialogue that we had throughout the week, again and again there was mentioning of not enough dialogue, not the right voices together in the right rooms. And so we asked the question to our dear panelists from their different perspectives, and they spent a lot of time with us. Who is missing? What is missing? What type of polar dialogue do we really need? And we start with whom do you want to start?
Who wants to start? Jefferson?
Myself, okay. Well, it's now quite clear that changes in the cryosphere are intensifying and are affecting everyone here knows how changes in the Arctic are affecting the economic, geopolitics, and mainly climate. And the couple atmospheric oceanic cryosphere system is changing faster and faster. And of course, we see similar things, but not at the same scale in the southern hemisphere. But one point that sometimes we forget is that we have other regions of the world, mainly the mountains, the third pole, the Himalayas, but also the Andes, that have changes that are much more imminent. Things are going faster, and even more important, it's affecting millions of people. We are having stronger disasters, natural or not natural disaster, doesn't matter. It's killing people. We are having floods because of the melting of the glaciers. And we are having also hydric stresses. A lot of the cities depend on the storage of water in the glaciers. And so we have a world crisis that goes beyond the polar regions. And I just emphasize, even related to process that sometimes we don't associate directly with ice and snow, like biomass burning in several parts of the world, not just in the Amazon, that are melting faster and faster glaciers. So I think that this brings another question. As the Arctic becomes more and more important, other authors want to come in and to discuss, because, as we say here, the things that happen in the Arctic don't stay in the Arctic. And the beginning, that's an important point, we are beginning to see the first signals that the Arctic changes are affecting the southern hemisphere.
It's happening at an alarming pace. If we go to you, Henry, next. We have been here in this session having dialogues between politicians and scientists. Is that the dialogue that is needed? And as Antje asked, do we need more people in the room?
Thank you very much. I'm lucky enough to have been coming to the Arctic Circle Assembly for the last 10 years. This is my 10 years anniversary. And so I've seen right from the very start, or almost the very start, how much fantastic dialogue and engagement there has been. And I am in no doubt that as we look forward to the International Polar Year in 2032-33, Arctic and Antarctic, that the science community themselves will come forward with fantastic plans. I have absolutely no doubt that that capacity is there to generate kind of bottom-up, big picture, big ambition, large-scale science projects and programs and initiatives. I have no doubt that that capacity is there. The thing that I'm thinking about is how we make that actually live and work. And for that to happen, it's the connection with the funding organizations, with the policymakers and decision makers, because there is such an enormous opportunity within the International Polar Year, North and South, to really make that work. IPY has a fantastic track record of success. It has genuinely shifted the dial in previous versions, and I know that the next one will too, but it needs the science community at the heart of it to drive it, so it's a science initiative, not a political initiative, but it needs political weight and funding weight behind it. So the part of the polar dialogue I would particularly like to see in the future is that connection with the funding agencies, businesses, philanthropy, private sector. Thank you.
Maybe to Miyuki.
Exactly. Yeah, you had us yesterday discussing an absence of youth voices, but also voices of those people we sometimes only talk about and not with. Do you want to give a bigger perspective on how the dialogue could be more inclusive?
Thank you. Hena khunei Qiajunnguaq Daorana Miyuki nga. Aban khwang miyunga no miyunga no. The reason why I say this in my native language is the answer to the question. Mm-hmm. What kind of dialogue do we need? We need to include the actual people that are living in the Arctic. You know, I'm from Greenland, Qiajunnguaq, the northernmost town in Greenland. And I'm born and raised there. I'm here in Iceland at an assembly for the Arctic, a plenary about ice. I live with ice. We know ins and out of it. And I want to quote what my dad has said, like, wise word of my dad, is like, trees are a lifeline for you, for your animals and your nature. In Arctic, ice is the same matter. It's our lifeline. So I agree with you. It is very important to not only the people and the animals, but for all of our survival. So we need to look beyond ourselves and look into the future from every angle. Mm-hmm. That's why I appreciate that you have, it's a bare minimum, but you have to include the voices of the Arctic, because that makes sense. It should be logical to include those who live there, those who know what the changes are. And I look around and I see people from all around the world with different languages, cultures, backgrounds, who are here to talk about Arctic. But all the things you talk about, all the things you don't talk about, the way you talk about it, all the decisions you make are affecting us. So the dialogue we need to have is with the people. I know I study anthropology, and also from lived experience, this boxing, science, one box, political, one box, culture, another box, that is harming. You can read about it from all the literatures that you can find online. You have the responsibility to educate yourself in that, because it's not separate. That's why I'm here. We need to have a dialogue that is transparent. We need all the different perspectives and worldviews. Science, biology is one thing. Indigenous biology is another thing. Inuit indigenous biology is another thing. Sapmi is another thing. Sami is another thing. So we need all of them, because the world is complicated. We can't simplify it with numbers. We can't simplify it with... Everything is interconnected, and it's very crucial to be transparent in a dialogue. Let's be frank. This is our life. I'm gonna go home from this, and I'm gonna have a call from my uncle back in my town telling about how unjust it is that all the people from all around the world gets to decide the future of Arctic and not them. I'm gonna go home with that. I'm here voluntarily. This is not my choice. Let's talk about the uncomfortable things. Let's talk about reality. No tiptoeing, no sugarcoating. And I'm very serious about that. We've talked about it here and there in the assembly. And that's very dangerous. Tokenism, greenwashing. It's all written about, it's all talked about. Just get into it. You are in our home. You know, when you visit a home, there are some unwritten rules that you abide by. Like, it's their home, you respect it. It's like you come to our home in Arctic. There are some rights. There is land rights, in specific Inuit rights, Sami rights, indigenous rights. I would require, before you get into the dialogue, you have to be educated by them. You cannot violate our rights. There should be a requirement to have this dialogue that you know all the rights that we have. Take that in. Now, it's very serious. It's about life and death. This is not just a topic, okay? Talk about emotions, talk about uncomfortability. I'm here shaking because I've had this traumatic thing yesterday about news from my family. I could easily just been home because no, this is more than me, okay? This is for a future. This is interconnected. So, yes, there's a lot, but transparency, accountability, and consequences to those who violate rights, because we have some people who don't know about them, and it's easy to violate rights. We have to have this serious conversation about the issue of that. I think that's what I was saying.
Thank you.
Thank you, Miyuki, and I think it's really important for having you here to talk about this, because we have, of course, felt the need to talk about not just the rights of the indigenous peoples around the Arctic, but also to address the violent history of oppression and colonialization that still affects a lot of communication with those peoples. So I think it's extremely important that we have you here, because this needs to be implemented in the dialogue we have. And also, we heard voices saying there is need not just to talk about natural science, which are very important, but also about the social dimension, the human dimension. And I think we will move on with that. But Pema, because you're here, you are from Bhutan, but you run the ICIMOD Center in Nepal, and there we also have people living in the mountains. So you can maybe tell us a little about your view on how that dialogue should be.
Thank you very much. Yes, I am from Bhutan, and I work in Nepal at the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development. At the onset, I would like to acknowledge President Grimson for bringing in the third pole into this process. Dialogues are very, very important. Now, if you look at the Himalayas, Himal in the local language means snow and ice. Himalaya means the land of snow and ice. Now, that is fast changing. The mountains are changing. The landscape is changing. And pathar means stone in the local language. So we may end up having a patharlaya, or land of stones, rather than land of snow and ice. So that is the scenario that you are painting. And as you rightly pointed out, in the Hindu Kush Himalayas, we have millions of people living within the mountains, within the vicinity of ice caps, ice masses, and exposed to avalanches and glacial lake outburst floods. So for us, it's really an opportunity to ask you to call for action. It's a call for action. But we have so many excuses, around the table, everywhere. I have been attending many conferences and workshops, and we hear, okay, we need more research. We need to do more monitoring. We need more evidence. But sometimes we tend to ignore what we already have. We have enough evidence in many cases to already act. So I think lack of information, lack of scientific evidence should not be always used as an excuse. Yes, research must go on. We have to bring in new knowledge, new science. But the science must already be used to benefit the planet, benefit the communities. So that is one, information. The other excuse that we use is lack of technology or innovation. So we are simply not using the innovations that are already working, that are already there, be it of indigenous kind, traditional kind, or modern innovation and technology. But sometimes we just wait for technology generated by AI or something and not act on what we have. There's so many ways we can already act upon in terms of adaptation, in terms of mitigation. The third excuse, lack of appropriate policy. If you look around, if you read, so many policies are there on water, on ice, on cryosphere, on biodiversity, but are they implemented? Are they used? I think this is another area that the policies which are already there are not being implemented. And finally, you would have heard lack of investment. Now, investment would mean many things. At the local level, there is enough to act locally. At the national level, the nations can do a lot on their own, without waiting for a huge, slice of money to come from outside. I think there's so much that the local, at the national level one can do. So again, investment, yes, we need additional investment for the regions like the Hindu Kush Himalayas, but there is also so much that we can do ourselves and not always use this blame game. Like the West is responsible for all the climate change. We did not pollute and we are suffering. I think we have to now appreciate the fact that we need to work together. We need to work together. And finally, collaboration, coordination is the key. Coordination at all levels. Even at the local level, we sometimes have different authorities, competing rather than complementing, and that is where we need to build up cooperation at local level, national level, regional level, and global level, and that is my takeaway from this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pema. So Pascal, last but not least, what are you searching for in dialogue, in polar dialogue?
Well, what kind of dialogue about the poles is the first question which we in the Paris Peace Forum had to address last year when the French president asked us to co-organize the first Polar Summit. And after quite a lot of brainstorming, we decided that this summit should have two specific features, which I'm extremely happy to see that the Arctic Circle has followed up on, and more to come. The first one is that it's about the poles, both, and this implies expanding the conversation to a series of issues which are less Arctic specific, of course. And the second is that it's ice, and it's ice everywhere. So we, from the beginning, wanted to include both poles and the cryosphere. And the second answer we gave about who should be the main participants in this dialogue, the answer was science and civil society, which is why we built these two major work streams last year, one about science with a series of conclusions, and one about civil society, including local populations. From the beginning of that summit, that was it. So this is where the Arctic Circle is now, and great that it's moved this way. And this is what I understand future polar dialogues will be about. And this is the thing we have in common with the tradition of the Arctic Circle and the newer Paris Peace Forum in a way, which is that we want to address these issues in a multi-stakeholder way. There is no, as it was said, it's a systemic issue. There is no way this can be addressed in a cluster way. It has to be multi-stakeholder, it has to be coordinated, it has to be across the board. And this is why I'm extremely happy that after last year's edition, this year's edition, the follow-up will be under this form of polar dialogues. And my experience in this area is that if you want to explain to people who may not, for good reasons, understand exactly what is at stake in climate change, what is at stake in the degradation of the ocean, of the hydrosphere, explaining what's happening to the poles and in the cryosphere is the best way to convince people that there is a frontier which for the moment is for a few people on this planet, but that if we don't change the way we address these questions, is going to be with a much larger part of the population. So I want especially to thank the sentinels that we have in these regions.
Okay. So we also had before this one a summary session where the participants in the polar dialogue came by, some of them, and they have dropped some notes what they would envision for a future of polar dialogue at the Arctic Circle. And it's a lot of notes, so I'll just mention some. There was some thinking that there is a transnational need for some themes that are not specifically only polar, but that matter a lot for a dynamically changing arena. And so, for example, the polar dialogue could select such transnational themes, like, for example, how will knowledge generated by artificial intelligence change the way we talk, the languages that were referred to? Will indigenous language have a place? Will it be marginalized? So how does this actually work? What will AI do to our way of leading a polar dialogue? That was one idea. But likewise, there was an idea that we could dedicate a whole polar dialogue to discussing planetary stewardship as the cryosphere is changing so fastly, is a sentinel, as we've heard. So what is it? Is it basically a guideline for planetary stewardship? There were more ideas like that, but there were also ideas, why are the same people organizing the polar dialogue that are organizing the conference? Should the polar dialogue not be giving to those whose voices are not fully represented? With two ideas. There could be simply the whole diversity of indigenous communities asked to create their own dialogue and invite themselves who they would like to have as guests. Or there was also a discussion, if it's about those communities who yet have no space of trust, what about them? For example, all the people working on solutions that we are often afraid of, like climate fixing, geoengineering, they don't yet have a space of trust. Should they be organizing in the polar dialogue such a space of trust and transparency? So these ideas were collected, and we will give now the floor to the room with suggestions, but one particular feedback we found exceptionally interesting. A lot of the young participants came up and said they like the polar dialogue if it is in a less formal room and atmosphere, so that there is a chance to actually see and listen to people representing them, and also getting to ask questions, because it's kind of scary in this big room to raise hands and ask questions, not so if you're in a less formal setting. So that was another recommendation to the polar dialogue.
Yes.
And now on to you.
Yes, our dialogues have been quite intimate and people have been quite active. So now we would really ask for your participation in this last panel, because I think one conclusion that we can draw is that dialogue is needed, collaboration is needed. We are faced with a transboundary challenge, which is the melting of the ice, which is happening at an alarmingly fast pace. We need to be able to talk about the cryosphere, but at the same time, we need to make the distinctions between different areas in the world where circumstances are extremely different. And there I'm obviously referring to the Arctic and its peoples, where we need to bear in mind that history that I mentioned earlier and that Miyuki referred to so well in her input. We need to be able to talk about Antarctica, and we need to be able to talk about other ice-covered areas, some of them where people are living. So, do I have a hand in the room? Yes, we have. Please.
And over there.
And over there. Okay, so maybe it would be great if you could introduce yourselves. Yes.
Hi, my name is Antje. I'm a master's student in international relations in the University of Iceland. You mentioned briefly about education, so this is more directed to Ms. Miyuki, Daorana, and Pema Gyamtsho. How can indigenous knowledge and traditions related to ice in the Arctic and Himalayan ecosystem be integrated into educational curriculum to promote sustainable practices and environmental awareness among the students?
Please.
Thank you for the question. And I would just like to correct you. I talked about the relevance of including the people of the Arctic. I didn't mention any Antarctica because
I was mentioning
criticized a lot because there was a lack of consent and inclusion of indigenous peoples from the beginning and local people. So I have some highly serious critic areas in the Polar dialect because of the lack of consent. But we can get into that later, but I want to answer the question about education because that is key to building the bridges. Because I can give you an example with Inua. You know, people say Inuit. Inuk means human or person, but it also means life and being and soul. We believe everything has an Inua. A river has an Inua. An animal has an Inua. We see it as an equal. It literally has life. It exists. It has a purpose. Every insect has a purpose. Every ecosystem is balanced and coherent because of all the components that are there. We can't control them. They're their own being. That's why we respect them. So the education that indigenous knowledge would bring to create bridges and to have a balance between science and politics and humanity is that we see everything equally. Hierarchy is a Western construction and it's everywhere. So humanizing and practicing a different way of seeing the world, a different way of thinking about the world, not viewing an animal as a consumerist object or not viewing the river as water, but as a flowing thing, entity that has a meaning, that keeps the salmon going, you know? Viewing it that way would humanize it and make it like, okay, how do we respect the nature while we do this research? Because if we do mining here, it would affect the animals here and the people here and the rights here, like everything is coherent. So what indigenous can bring to the table is challenging these dominant hegemonies and discourses that overpower and create imbalance, and like bring a different worldview to the table that would ensure, because you know, indigenous peoples are the stewards of this planet. We are the minority of the population of the globe, only around less than 10%, but we protect 80% or like more, majority of the biodiversity. That says a lot. And if you just really educate yourself and take your time and actively take responsibility in learning all of that, it would, because education is both ways. It's not just teacher and pupil. It's a two-way street. You have a responsibility, and I have a responsibility. It's the kind of stuff. Yeah.
Thank you. There was another question here.
Thank you. So my name is Geneviève Pons, and I am the co-chair of Antarctica 2030. And last year, I was also co-chair of the civil society part of the first Polar Summit. And I wish to, in a certain manner, answer to what I think it's Miyuki has said. It is extremely important that people like you or Pema come here and express themselves. Last year, we were absolutely struck by a lady coming from the Andean mountains. And it was a small lady with traditional costume, speaking only Spanish. And she came to explain how climate change has destroyed not only the ice cap of her region, but also the agriculture and every resources, and has finally killed their culture, and the population was sent to cities with small jobs. And she told us what the reality of climate change is. And people, thanks to Pema who was here, to this lady who was here, and to some others, well, actually many, who came to visit us in Paris, to tell their story, thanks to them, everybody understood what is at stake, what is happening now, what climate change already means. And so it is extremely important that you come. Because if you don't come, the rest of the world does not understand what is now happening. What the reality that will be ours is already for you. So please continue.
Thank you.
We have room for one last question.
Over there in the middle.
Because the time is running out. So there is one there in the middle.
My name is Grace, and I'm a master's student at the University of Iceland, partaking environmental and natural resources. And Miyuki and Pema, I really, first of all, want to thank you for your perspective. And I think the whole of this conference, I really love to listen to the indigenous and Arctic people's voices. And I want to hear your opinion as you say that ice is the lifeline of your people. And so with this icebreaker being built, I want to hear your opinion, both of you. Like, do you think that the indigenous people and the Arctic people have been involved? Like, have their voices been heard? And is this a solution in your perspective? Is this the right solution in concerns with the biodiversity in the sea and the habitat in the sea, which is also big part of your culture? And so I really want to hear your perspective on that. And also, as we know that the award of the Arctic Circle went to the building, towards like building this icebreaker. So yeah, your perspective. Thank you.
Well, time is running out, but Miyuki and Pema, this question was directed to you.
Thank you very much. I'll take these two questions together. I think there was a similar one earlier. As already explained by Miyuki, I think the first thing is to take the local people, the indigenous people, into confidence, recognize the value of ice, the value of cryosphere to their livelihoods, their culture, and so on. So that is very, very important. And then to include them and engage them in the discussions. So for example, we need to find out who are actually most affected at the forefront of this climate change impact on the ice. Ice means water. So who is much affected. Now, in the case of the Himalayas, we are talking about the mountaineering community. In case of Nepal, it's the Sherpas. In case of the whole Himalayas, is the yak herders, the nomads. They are affected. And the yaks are a peculiar animal. They cannot resist hot temperatures. So they have to live under a certain temperature. So there is a good indicator of climate change. And I believe this is the same with the reindeer herders in the Arctic. So we would really like to bring these communities together to also share experiences. Now, what is important for us to acknowledge is that the climate change impacts and the threats, the dimensions are so huge that often it is beyond the comprehension of indigenous people. So while we have to use indigenous knowledge, indigenous traditions and so on, we have to take into account the fact, the enormity, the scale of the problem. That is too huge. So I think this is something that we need to take.
And Miyuki, please. Yeah, and then we will.
Yeah, I can do it.
Yes, I wanted you to answer the question. That
Thank you.
To you.
Where is this? I completely agree, and it is very serious. It's not only like facts, as I say, and we need to rethink everything because all of the structures that we have here, the norms, the culture, the way we speak, the way we're professional, they are contributing to the climate crisis. Everything is Western dominated. It's very plain said, like generally speaking. Like I can give you an example. Feelings are considered unprofessional and informal and unreliable. That's not entirely what feelings are about. Feelings are knowledge in our community. When you feel something's wrong, it's wrong. Trust your feelings and listen to each other. Build empathy. It's a practice. That's when you know what's right and wrong. We need to establish that and put that on top. Prioritize human rights. Who are suffering? Why? Because of this structure, because of this oppression. That is the most important thing. People, what do you value? When you go from this, I want you to consider, what are your values? What do you love? What do you think's right and wrong? Not just for yourself, but for others. Because we can teach you all about the facts and the functions of ecosystems. That we can do that. But you also need to learn humanity, is what I have been talking about with my fellow indigenous peoples. And that's why that's the path to solving climate change. You have to love the ice. Ice is not just a number or a physics thing. It's also you relating to it. We need feelings, we need transparency, we need to acknowledge that there is an issue, there is power inequality. Yes, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now our time is up, so thank you all very much. I think actually it's a very good also thought that we take with us, that love and care is something that we need more of in all our lives. So I think we can all take that thought with us. We could have stayed here longer because these panelists have so much to share, but thank you all for participating. And me and Antje, we say also thank you.
Ourselves.
We thank ourselves for 3 hectic days. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.